We go. All right. So, hi everybody. My name is Covich Bordenick. I'm the CEO of the eHealth Initiative, and I'm really delighted to have with me today Congresswoman Blunt Rochester from Delaware. Thanks for taking time to speak with us today.
Thank you, Jen, and thanks for having me.
Sure. Well, as a member of the influential House Energy and Commerce Health Subcommittee and the new Democrat Coalition Healthcare Task Force, which we're really excited to hear about, you've really been at the forefront of healthcare policy for much of your career, which is very relevant to the work we've been doing. We've done a number of reports on social determinants of health this year, the impact of COVID on vulnerable communities, and the use of analytics to identify these at-risk groups and how to use digital tools like telehealth to try to bridge the divide there. So I know that this is close to your heart as well. And when the pandemic hit this year, it really disrupted the healthcare system and highlighted the cracks in the system. And I wanted you to talk a little bit specifically about the impact of COVID on your state, Delaware, and the vulnerable communities. And, I know you were the former Deputy Secretary of Health and Social Services in Delaware. So you're really intimately aware of the issues here. So talk a little bit how this impacted your state. And maybe some of the solutions you saw.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to commend the eHealth Initiative for your leadership in this space and also for being a convener of stakeholders, because in my history of working in state government, federal government, in the nonprofit sector as the CEO of the Urban League in Delaware, what I recognize is that it's the collaboration, it's the sharing of information and best practices, and then the working on these issues together that make us stronger and make the policy stronger and ultimately give us the outcomes that we want to see. And that's really what it's really about. It's about getting really good health outcomes for people so that they can live and thrive. And so I want to first start off by saying thank you. For me, data is important. I mean, it starts with data. There's a James Baldwin quote, and I know I'm going to get it wrong, but it's basically saying that you can't fix what you don't see. If you don't, it's important for us to recognize that what the disparities are, what the inequities are, and also when we're improving, because then we know when we need to do more of something. So first, I just want to say thank you. Secondly, in addition to wearing the hat of Energy and Commerce, as well as the New Dems, I'm also in the Progressive Caucus. I'm one of the few that says, hey, I represent a whole state, and I believe that I want to represent all the interests. Similar to eHealth Initiative, I need to be at the table. And even in my own state, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, I noticed that we were collecting data based on age, based on geography in our state, based on gender, but we were not collecting data based on race. And I knew from my past experience that many times the people who are most impacted, particularly by a health situation, will be particularly people of color. And so it was really important to say to our state, we need to be collecting this data. Then what we found out, just being also a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, is that we had across the country places where data was not being consistently collected. And so this became something that was really important to our state, but also across the country. And that's why the work that you're doing is so, so important. And it's going to have impact across government and across states across the country.
So specifically in Delaware, maybe, talk a little bit about when you were at the Department of Health and Social Services. Are there specific communities there that you focused on? Were there any programs that you found, particularly successful with vulnerable communities, or tell us about that?
Yeah, well, what I would say is that when I was there, we're talking, my goodness, I became Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services, Health and Social Services in Delaware in 1994. So we're
Wow.
going back a while. And I was there in
Almost
that
before
position.
data.
Right, right. It's so funny. It's like, okay, there's a really great filter on my thing here. So I'm
Right.
really 98. But but anyway, I started in that position. And at that time, I remember really actually seeing the numbers on a range of issues. HIV AIDS, infant mortality. We were seeing these disparities that were huge. And at that time, there had been a minority health council in the past, and there had been an office, and I just started advocating to bring back the Office of Minority Health. And what in this day and age, that's one of the messages for me, is that
Mhm.
we don't want to just have an office of minority health. We
Right.
want to look at every single issue through an equity lens. In Delaware, our population, people don't realize that we're an agriculture state, we're a financial services state, we have chemical companies, but we also are very diverse as it pertains to the African American population, the Latino population, the indigenous people, we Asian American, we have a very diverse state, and we mirror the country in terms of our numbers. And so what we were seeing there is really a microcosm of what was happening across the country. And what I saw is, when you do focus on things that are culturally competent, that really take into account and you've talked about this in your report, who are the real influencers of various communities. I mean, I might have been Deputy Secretary of Health and Social Services, but it was maybe Aunt Mabel in the community that people knew and trusted. We had the same issue when we were there was a mammography van that would go from place to place to help to deal with, transportation issues.
Right.
But as we discussed issues in the Latino community, it was like we had to make adjustments to how those services were actually carried out. And so, in addition to better, outcomes, better services, you also get to deal with issues such as trust.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why talking about this from an ethical lens is very important as well. We know that for the Black community, even the idea of a vaccine for COVID-19,
Right.
there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy out there. And so to be able to have data that helps us to not just know where the vaccine needs to be deployed and how, but it also creates an opportunity for building trust. And, we think of Tuskegee experiment, we think of all of these things in history that make people not have trust. And that's why it's important that we are very ethical about how we do this.
And I love that you're talking about the ethical issues here and health equity. And so, what do you think Congress's role should be in this, in terms of health equity and increasing digital health access? Is there a role for Congress at the federal level, or is this something that should be handled more at a local level?
I think each and every one of us has a role to play in this. I mean, and that's again why being a convener is so important, because people get to see what their roles are and they get to see what their lane is. But I think, first of all, for members of Congress, it's important for us to be informed and also to investigate what's working, what's not working, and also, to have hearings to do that. So we in Congress have held hearings over the past year to talk about everything from COVID-19 to the use of data and to privacy issues. So we have a responsibility to investigate and to see what's out there and to find out what the best practices are and what's not working. We also have a responsibility to legislate. And so to put into the law those guardrails for use of data, to put into the law those programs that are actually working. It's investigate, legislate, and appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
We got to make sure the money is there. That's a key point, that Congress's role is to make sure that we have the funding. Even in this current vaccine situation, that was one of the key things that we started off with from the very beginning, was to make sure that the revenue was there to actually test and have private sector in partnership with private sector to actually come up with a vaccine. And then the last role that we have is oversight. You know, we're not the ones that are going to be out there giving the vaccine, but we need to make sure that that we're doing it appropriately, properly, and that there is real oversight. So those are some of the roles that we have. And the last thing I would add is to the bully pulpit. We can also get the word out, and we can also be that voice to say, this is how we should be looking at these issues. This is what we're learning, and to help in that, you know, that trust factor piece as well, because we were elected by the people. And so it's important that we represent the people.
Well, one of the things that we've identified in a number of regions just around the country is infrastructure. So, you know, broadband, I mean,
Yes.
you don't have just the basics there. And infrastructure has been discussed a lot in the last decade, really. Do
Right.
you think, you know, it's time now,
Yes.
and that an infrastructure package could potentially finally address some of these digital issues?
Oh my gosh. I think you know, you hit on the issue that touches so many of us, and one of the biggest opportunities for us as a country. The thing about infrastructure is a lot of times people think of roads and bridges and water systems, but it's also that broadband internet and that connectivity. And especially we've seen from COVID. I actually started a bipartisan Future of Work caucus in the Congress, the first of its kind, because I felt that we weren't looking at artificial intelligence, machine learning, automation, and the impact that it would have on jobs. But it was really this pandemic that pushed the future of work, or the future of life even, because this is how we're getting our education. This is how people are working. And then telehealth itself, one of our children's hospitals in Delaware, health system, they saw a 2,200% increase in telehealth services. So it is the new electricity. I mean, basically, it is the 21st century version of electricity. We need it. Whether you're in a rural area or whether you're in a spotty area in a city, you need this to live. And so this, to me, is a #1 priority and opportunity for a new administration and for a new Congress. #1, it touches every single member of the Congress. #2, it could create jobs, and it could create clean energy jobs. And so that you're dealing with the environment, you're dealing with jobs, you're dealing with our health, and you're dealing with our livelihoods in terms of, again, of businesses. And so I see this as a big opportunity in the next Congress. And I think you can just watch out, because I think it's going to be one of the #1 things after or next to getting rid of this pandemic. I mean, the pandemic is top of the ticket for everyone.
And you mentioned AI there, artificial intelligence. Can you just expand a little bit on that? I know you've got legislation, and just let people know a little bit about that and what you're thinking there.
Well, I mean, at this point, you know, we as a Congress have to think about the fact that there are other countries around the world, including China, who have basically said they want to match us in artificial intelligence by 2025 and surpass us by 2030. We as a country need to be very much focused on this area, how it impacts jobs. There are people that right now are doing jobs that may leave. Then how do we as a Congress, as a people, lean in, prepare people for the jobs of the future? There are other things that, particularly in the health space, where there's so much opportunity using artificial intelligence. I've seen right at our own hospitals where the docs are doing things in new and creative ways that we've never seen before using artificial intelligence. Even our farmers in Delaware, I actually was in a home while the woman who owned the farm, which showed me on an iPad how she was actually just beaming this information from her crops to her iPad in her kitchen to see what hadn't been irrigated, what needed irrigation. And then there are actual machines that can pick pick berries. I went to McDonald's, watched automation. That was my first job working at McDonald's. I go into a McDonald's of today. I couldn't even keep up. The machine was pouring the soda, it was just like all this stuff going on. But I think that's why, focusing on bills, like I have a bipartisan bill with my colleague, Congressman Carter, on telehealth modernization. I have another bill with my Republican colleague that deals with rural telehealth access and the Tykes Act, and also using things like Medicaid and CHIP creatively so that we can help support the efforts that we're trying to do as it pertains to the social determinants of health, as it pertains to telehealth, and as we look at expanding things like broadband. So I think it's a very interesting time and an important time. But again, it gets to why your work is so important and why all the stakeholders have to be at the table, because if we want to do it right, we have to do it together.
Right. Which leads me to my final question here, which is a top concern of a lot of folks across the healthcare spectrum is, you co-sponsored legislation this year to increase the use of telehealth in Medicaid and Medicare programs. Because, as you know, many eHI members, a lot of the policies that are allowing for telehealth to be used during COVID are temporary.
Yes.
Amazingly. So
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about where you think this is going? Certainly we would love for some of these to be built into federal healthcare programs permanently. Do you think that's possible? What do you think, if you could read the tea leaves here?
I think it is possible. I think it is necessary. And again, back to silver linings, first of all, I think there's not one person in this country who hasn't been impacted by COVID-19. And, our hearts break for all of the families that have been impacted, whether it was the passing of a family member or just trying to survive in this situation. And, I in the future work conversations, there's a thing called future proofing. We know that this is not the last pandemic we'll ever see. We know that climate change is real and happening, and it's impacting how people can even live and work, with fires and floods. And so part of why it is so important that we stabilize and maintain what we've learned from this pandemic is because we need to future-proof, as well as make sure, back to the outcomes. If what we're seeing just from this pandemic, everything from people not having to deal with the transportation issues that have been a barrier for so many, people being able to actually access care, mental health care, for example, to me is one of the major things that has come out of this, that people are more accessing mental health and getting the mental health help they need, and not feeling the stigma sometimes of going out of their own home to do it. I think what this pandemic has shown us is that we need to do things and think more creatively, more out of the box. And if we have lessons that we've learned, we need to stick with them. We need to make sure it's easier for healthcare professionals to provide the services and do it in a culturally competent way, and also have the tools to do it, which is why, passing the Protecting Access to Post-COVID-19 Telehealth Act of 2020 is important. The Connect for Health Act, there are bipartisan things that would expand telehealth, that would expand and keep some of the, even just to be able to reimburse docs and provide healthcare providers for the services that they provide. We need to continue that. And those are the kind of things that we will continue to fight for. And I I think that because it is Democrats, Republicans, Independents, people across the country have seen the benefit of this. It goes back to what you said, what's the role of Congress? It is to investigate. We now know data. We have data on this. It's also to legislate. We've got bills we need to pass, appropriate, make sure that the money is there to support it, and then provide the oversight. That's our role. That's what we need to do. And I think together with the help of all of those who are watching, we'll get there.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, and we're so grateful for joining us today. Appreciate
Thank you
it.
for
It's
having me.
always
Thank
been a
you.
really important issue, and certainly right now it's coming to a head. So thank
Yes.
you, Congresswoman.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. And listen, we've got plenty of great lessons learned. And if you ever need any stories or best practices or for any of your hearings, please let us know. That's what we
Yeah.
do.
Well, we will definitely do that. As a matter of fact, I was talking to Betsy on our team, and
Yeah.
both Betsy and Kevin, actually are tied into that's why I love Energy and Commerce. It is the
Yeah.
best committee. I mean, the jurisdiction is broad, and the work that we work on is so important. So
Well,
yes.
you've been fantastic. I mean, you're doing such important work, and it's spot on all of your legislation. Thank you.
I
You're
can't believe
fantastic.
it's like all coming together at such an important time. So
Yeah, it is. Thank you so much for your time today.